UNESCO released a plan to combat misinformation by creating what they call the Internet of Trust. That's not what you're on right now. You're not on the Internet of Trust. You're on the Internet of all things, I guess.
Watching Redacted, you mean?
In general, not on Redacted,
okay.
You're on the Internet of Trust. I hope you trust us. You came here. But in general, they think they need to create it. The Internet of Trust. If you think that sounds Orwellian, you're not alone. What they want, in short, is along the lines of the World Health Organization's pandemic treaty that we've been talking about quite a bit. They basically want to create global rules for the Internet in the name of disinformation that leads to, you guessed it, censorship, right? So we're going to call this equivalent to the pandemic treaty, but it has nothing to do with health. It's basically a way for the UN to run the internet and censor speech. And they literally wrote it down for us all to see. This is not me extrapolating. I'm going to show you the actual plan, and you decide if you think this is an overreaction or not. I don't like it one bit, so buckle up. Let's go over this document of thinly veiled nefarious intent. Here is the plan for guidelines for the governance of digital platforms. Now, notice this report, the word safeguarding free speech with a multi-stakeholder approach. Anytime you see multi-stakeholder or even stakeholder in and of itself is a word that gives me pause. Now that there's multi-stakeholder, I don't like it even more. This means they can claim that something's good for everyone in a roundabout way, even if it's kind of a stretch, so that you could make the case that censoring COVID speech was for your own good because it allowed the government to tell us all what to do and what was good for everyone, and they think that was good, right? That's how they mean it. Like it's good for these people and these people, even if it's not good for this group, in the end, it's good for everybody. That's what they mean. What they suggest here is this multi-stakeholder approach. They're saying that they need to do this because misinformation wreaks havoc on democracy. You can see what it says here. Democracy, dialogue, and debate is essential, but it becomes impossible because of misinformation. They say, faced with the global nature of this, we need to develop consistent responses around the world. That means you can't allow free speech in, say, Brazil, if us in the United States and Europe want to censor. You got to censor too, Brazil. No freedom for you if we're taking freedoms over here. It's almost like, what do we call this, race to the bottom? Like setting the low tax rate. Like if we're all going to behave shitty, everybody's got to do it. These are rules for everybody.
We're teaching to the lowest common denominator. It's like what they're doing in Oregon with schools right now.
No, I don't think that's not what.
You're teaching to the lowest common. You're teaching to the weakest in the class. Right? You're basically
no. That's not it. Not it at all, really. No,
you're setting a low bar, and you're all right. Whatever.
Okay, what you're doing here?
Listen, Lilith.
You're setting some shitty rules, and you want to set these shitty rules, but you can't have other countries behaving freely. So you got to make them follow your shitty rules too. It's a standard of control, and it only works if everybody takes freedom. It doesn't work if some people still have freedom. So here's what they want to do. They say that here they want to propose online moderators in all languages over the whole internet, you guys. Online moderators in all languages, including indigenous ones, greater transparency of platforms and their financing with better risk assessment, the establishment of independent regulators, promotion of critical thinking, support for gender equality. Why is that there with all other types of inequality we have? We're pointing out gender. And above all, safeguarding and strengthening of freedom of speech, cultural diversity, and other human rights.
Yeah, I can't wait to learn who these online moderators will be. Who's going to employ them? Where will they come from? Will they come from the intelligence community? Will they come from MI6? Will they come from the CIA?
Oh, well, they say they don't know who exactly it will be. They're going to set it up. But when they do, they will be transparent about it. So I'm sure that's exactly what you want is online moderators of the whole internet. How do you feel about that?
Well, these moderators, the people that they have at Facebook, the censors or whatever that they have.
Yeah.
We've done stories where those people are like they want to like kill themselves. They're so miserable
Yeah,
and
right.
they're awful. And they're like 21-year-olds and they're just seeing like stuff all day and they have to make a decision and what they ban, what they don't.
Right.
And they're miserable and depressed and they last like a month in the job before they want to kill themselves.
Right. Now, these guidelines, they not only want them to be sort of best practices of the internet of the planet, they also want them to be international law, meaning it is superseding your country's own law. So let's say I'm going to use Brazil, like in Brazil, it's still allowed to talk about the COVID vaccine. They're going to say, no, these need to be laws for everybody. Look at this word here, how it's written. It says, depending on the issue and jurisdictional context, such governance process may take the form of a combination of complementary pillars, self-regulation, co-regulation, and statutory regulation. You see that word statutory there? That means they want these rules about online speech to be the law, not just good practice. Now, the document pays lip service to freedom of expression, but then here's where it gets to the heart of it. What it really wants to do is censor. And again, it's heavy on gendered misinformation. So there could be misinformation about all types of things, but it's saying like this is especially about hate speech and gender-based or racial hatred or religious hatred. It says they need to strongly discourage, including through measures such as professional codes of conduct, the public officials from disseminating disinformation, including all of these things, gendered disinformation, misinformation. Well, what do they consider gendered disinformation? Because the United Nations promotes gender ideology quite clearly, right? And so they are all in on a trans woman as a woman, even though biologically that's not true. That then feeds into the biopharmaceutical complex. So if I say, no, a trans woman is a biological man who should not be in a locker room with my daughter, that is maybe gendered misinformation that I would not be allowed to disseminate anymore. I don't know, the document, like I said, is very heavy on gender-specific censorship. Go ahead, David.
And not only not be able to say it, but it's saying law, which means you would be breaking a law, which means there would be consequences to breaking that law.
Yes.
Legal consequences.
Yes. Yeah. Now, it says that states should not monitor online platform, but then on the same page, it says that there should be content moderation. So who do you think that would be then? Take a look. It says states shall refrain from, and then if you look at B, basically content moderation, but digital platforms should, look at 30B, have content moderation. So who do you think that would be? It's not your government. It's someone that ranks above your government, because it just says there, it doesn't want your state to do it, wants us to do it. Presumably, us as in the United Nations, an international body.
Oh, you mean like the World Economic Forum? Or maybe
something like that.
World Health, unelected group of globalists that can put together a team.
Yes,
maybe.
Exactly right.
Get Klaus Schwab on it or something like that.
Precisely that group.
I hear Nina Jankowicz is looking for work.
Right, Nina Jankowicz, Jacinda Ardern. All these people, all these clowns. Justin Trudeau, soon, he'll be out of a job.
Yeah.
He could be a part of it. He could lead it.
Now, they call this unelected global officials, they call them intergovernmental organizations, intergovernmental collaborators who have the right to censor speech and create laws around that. Here's where they line up those roles. Now, again, they're not elected people. They're just people the United Nations will say, will make these laws, and then you don't have a right to work around it because your country has given up sovereignty to the United Nations. Again, it says they, should support providing technical assistance, monitoring and reporting human rights violations, developing relevant standards. And again, here's that word, facilitating multi-stakeholder dialogue and nurturing networks. And they need to share emerging insights and regulatory trends and support or making suggestions to national regulators to define institutional standards and methods of safeguarding freedom of speech and expression. So again, unelected people making laws for your internet. Now, they also say they need to work with each country's civil society to implement these rules, and they define those organizations as the media, schools, engineers, and social scientists. So those outfits, your school, the media will have to report to the United Nations to be clear that they are working along with the plan.
They're compliant.
To not disseminate any misinformation. They would have to report to those regulatory bodies.
I wonder if they would lose funding as a result of it, because that's exactly what usually happens in these situations. Is they're threatened with the that's what under the military arms control, the Military Act of 1967. Of course, you can't turn down military recruiters coming into your schools, or for the risk of losing funding at your school, right? In the same way, if you don't comply with this, would you lose some sort of a funding?
But this is not federally funded. It's only federally funded in the fact that United Nations member states pay into the United Nations like a golf club.
Right.
And the golf club then sets the rules, and you have to comply with those rules, Miffy, or else you're out of there. But what does that mean for a violator of a member state?
Well, these member states, of course, have given over their sovereignty to the United Nations, to the World Health Organization, to the World Economic Forum. And so they defer their decision-making body to them.
Right. So let's play this out, because at least in the United States, we still have the court system that is supposed to work out when we have a violation of our First Amendment rights. So let's play out this gendered thing. And I say that person who's being, put in this locker room with my daughters is a biological male. And that is in violation of the new United Nations Internet of, what do we call it? Internet of Fun? Internet of Trust.
Internet of Trust. The circle of trust.
Yeah. Yeah. And they say, you can't say that on the Internet of Trust about this biological male. And so you are in violation of that. Well, as it stands now, I'm fairly confident that I could take that to the Supreme Court and win. But what if this were a superseding law, a superseding document that supersedes the Constitution and the Supreme Court? That is highly possible with a document like this. I am giving you worst case scenario, and you are free to say, no, that's taking it too far, but it's written here.
Well, yeah, and it's not taking it too far when we already see the United States deferring decision-making to the World Health Organization. We saw it during the pandemic, giving them extra constitutional authority above the United States Constitution. So it's not a conspiracy at all. It's absolutely the case already.
Well, they wrote it down, and I'm showing it to you.
And every single platform during the pandemic used the WHO as a disclaimer underneath the content that that's who was right during this.
Yeah, great point. In fact, YouTube, which banned us a couple of times, took us down and blocked our channel twice because of COVID content, where we were reading Pfizer's own documents. They claimed it was a violation under the World Health Organization guidelines. So they were claiming World Health Organization authority. Now, it's a private company. They can do whatever the heck they want, right? But would the United States government do that above and beyond? I think they absolutely do.
Well, it remains to be seen if they can do whatever they want. They're going to find out. They effed around and find out with the Supreme Court case whether or not they can censor speech at the behest of a government. We're not sure yet. That hangs in the balance. But at this point, what we're looking at is whether or not we hand the United Nations the power to set the rules for the entire internet, the Internet of Trust, which is not the Internet of Fun, the opposite.
I want to go to the opposite of the Internet of Trust.
Yeah, I mean, okay.
I mean,
that's the dark web, isn't it?
I guess that's the dark web then. Yeah, I don't know. Or just where you can actually post things and not.
But that is sort of how I feel Twitter is right now. Like I trust way more what I see on Twitter these days than what I see in any mainstream.
It is interesting
outlet.
Today. I mean, you bring up a good point. Today, Elon Musk goes to Israel, and Twitter, which he owns, is like a lot of people slamming him for going and meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu. So there was a huge backlash on the platform that he owns.
Right.
Slamming him.
Yeah.
And then he comes out a few hours later and says, "Hey, I know this is trite to say, but I'm just for I'm pro world peace." Like that's so He didn't to what I know, he didn't censor anyone, but maybe we'll find that there's accounts that were banned because people slammed him.
That guy can take it. Now, here's one other thing I'd like you to look at that gives me gas pains. This is something they want to do, which is measure for electoral integrity on the internet. Election integrity, you say. So they want to actually control information during elections. How did they do when Democrats falsely said that Russia was interfering in our elections? Maybe if they'd handled that, then we would listen to them. But given that they're saying, well, we need to make sure what election information's out there. Basically, anytime any outside agency is regulating what can be said around an election, they are influencing the outcome of that election. Do you think the United Nations should be influencing the outcome of elections? I don't. And how do they define, again, stakeholders in elections, right? This idea of multi-stakeholder. They're going to say, what we're doing is for the greater good in the end. It's for your own good. You may not like it because you don't like Hillary Clinton, but in the end, it will be good for all of us. By all of us, it means them and their wallets. If Hillary Clinton wins, so we're going to make it that way on the internet, right? And we will censor accordingly with that sort of thin ice explanation. Again, this is a worst case scenario, but absolutely could be seen. The fact that they even wrote it down, that they're really worried about election integrity, that we can't share even false information in order to discuss amongst ourselves our vote. We should not be trusted to do that. So then what do we do, right? If we have information, even true information, which the United Nations has said many times that they think even true information can create an infodemic, then what are we going to do? We won't use the internet. I guess we use a whisper campaign. Now, of course, no UN document would be complete without special rules for an emergency. All rules are out the window if there is an emergency or a crisis. This is how they sort of lay that out. And again, we've seen over and over these governing bodies taking more rules under the auspices of emergency. So the fact that it's there, tells us that, like, it's basically hitting all the check marks. Like, if I had put the World Health Organization pandemic treaty and this document side by side, it plays all the hits, right? Censor, monitor, control, usurp state sovereignty, all of those things. So I'm going to encourage that you read it for yourself. We're talking about it today. I will put it in the newsletter tomorrow with a link to the original source so you can read it for yourself. You can find the Redacted newsletter at redacted.inc. It's a free newsletter, and we don't upsell you anything. I just want you to be able to read these things for yourself and see, what do you think? Am I overreacting? Or it's here, right? You react. You decide how you react, if it's in line with mine or it's not. And maybe, it'd be fine, all of these ideas of like transparency and integrity and truth and all of these things, although I subscribe to the philosophy that when all information is available, humans can discern for themselves what is true and what is not, but we have to be able to see false information to know the difference between true and false. They're saying, no, you only can see what we dub as true, and you can't tell for yourself because you're too stinking stupid. Again, if they had maybe done better during the pandemic or during the last presidential election or during the last few wars and said, you need to see everything for yourself. No, but instead, anything they don't like you to see, they try and turn your head away from and label it as misinformation. So these are not the bodies that we have reason to trust. So let us know what you think.
And we already know they also don't like. We already know that they also don't like truth that they find inconvenient. Like that, they've had that in other documents where they're like it's not even disinformation. They're like, well, we just don't like this truth, so that's outlawed as well.
Yeah.
So,
right. Yeah, and it's not even just the misinformation that they're worried about. They've literally admitted on camera, which we've shown you here, the downranking and hiding of climate information that they don't want you to see. So they literally work with Google to hide those search results. So, and moving it down further on pages so you can't see it at all, so that their information is first on the page, the United Nations.
Mm-hmm. So. Yes. Yeah. I mean, they don't really, at this point, downranking, it wouldn't even be necessary because it would just be an eraser for everything that they don't like. Like I said, it's absolutely Orwellian control of information. So, we've had guests on the show who have said that they think that the United States and other nations should withdraw from the United Nations. I am of that opinion too. I don't know how we can make that happen collectively, but if you have conversations with your local politicians, it is worth mentioning because this organization is not our friend.
Yeah, and what does it get us? The idea is that, well, we want to have a conversation. It's the place, it's the only thing we've got, right? The League of Nations didn't work. It's a place where we can all come together and actually have a conversation. But when the conversation isn't allowed to happen, or you're not even allowed to have a hearing because other members won't allow it to happen because they don't like it.
Yeah.
Russia has faced this, right? They try to have hearings on this. No, okay, well, we can't have it. We're not acknowledge that it even happened.
Well, look, we have how many votes in the United Nations about a ceasefire for Israel that took 3 weeks and none of them were enforced. We have history of the United Nations when Belgium withdrew from Congo. They said, oh, but we can't protect you from Belgium, but everyone else were ready to enforce your sovereignty. They had a two-state solution for Palestinians that never went anywhere. Like, what are they good for? They're only protecting their own interest. And it's not enforceable. So I don't see any value other than diplomacy, which could happen outside of the walls of an organization like that. So I really do think that the United Nations is, what do they call it in the Bible? The many-headed beast, the two-headed beasts, many-headed beasts. Like there is, there are. I was raised a Jehovah's Witness, and Jehovah's Witnesses absolutely believe that the United Nations is
evil,
is an evil organization. And I never really thought about it until like I had left that organization and then started studying the United Nations. And in that respect, I think they're not wrong.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at Redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to Redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.